The next area that you can set up details and give the system rules to follow is on the part record itself under your site detail. Couple of the controls that I called out here. First is the non-stock checkbox. The system will always set up these particular parts on demand only. You determine whether it's something we make or buy with your type. And then you've got your inventory settings, your minimums, your maximums, and your safety. Something to make note of here, and I bracketed it there for us, is the available versus on hand. System recognizes when a material is required on a future job, and it'll calculate the available quantity. So I may have 5 on hand, and if I walk out and look on that shelf, there may be 5 on that shelf. And in that particular situation, I'm absolutely fine. But if there's a job out there that we're going to run next month and it requires 1 of those, then my available is only 4. And so the system will pick up on that. It will compare the available to the minimum on hand. And if your available falls below the minimum, it'll send a signal to either your manufacturer, your production manager, if it's a make item, or to your purchasing department, if it's a buy item. You've got your maximum. So when it sets up a job or generates a PO, it'll try to you can set it so that it buys up to the max. That's the little checkbox there at the bottom that says reorder to max. Or it'll set up a job to manufacture that assembly or that top level product so that you increase your quantity on hand to the maximum. And then a lot of companies will try to float between the minimum and the maximum so that they're not creating multiple POs for the same raw material throughout the week, multiple jobs for the same make item throughout the week. It's another area where you can reduce the amount of noise or the amount of suggestions the system recognizes. Another way to say that is, let's say my minimum is 5 and I do not reorder to max. I have 5 on a shelf and I just promised 1 to a job. So the system says, well, your available is 4. So it'll buy 1. And that'll show up in your PO suggestion. Go out and buy 1 of these things, or go out and make 1 of these things. And then on Tuesday, another job goes in the system, and it finds that I need another one. Well, it'll suggest another PO on Tuesday, and then another on Wednesday. So you can use your min max and your reorder to max to help reduce that, so that it'll buy you to the maximum, and then you can just work your way back down to the minimum before you have to deal with another suggestion. And then you have your safety stock, which is your minimum plus your safety and your reorder point. So it's just another way to add some cushion into the system so that you have adequate supply of purchase as well as make items. And then I've already kind of commented on the reorder to max. It'll modify your suggestion quantity so that you are buying enough to satisfy the imbalance, plus whatever it takes to get you back to the maximum. Another screen you'll find on your part site detail card is the MRP planning area. This is more in terms of your manufactured products. So we have a planning time fence. First of all, the first is you can tick the box whether or not you wanted to consider this particular part in the MRP algorithm. Some customers are fine with certain assemblies or finished goods being suggested, where they may decide, well, these other types of parts, I do not want the MRP engine to be analyzing. We'll deal with those on an ad hoc basis. Your planning time fence is, how many days out the system will stop making changes to your jobs. So, for example, if you firm up your schedule and you don't want any changes to those jobs within the next 7 days or the next 2 weeks, you can set your planning time fence out 2 weeks, and it'll leave those firmed jobs alone and then only suggest changes to anything outside of that fence. This is another great tool to reduce the variation or the constant changes to your schedule. Once we firm a job and I'm inside of my planning time fence, I may have raw materials on purchase. If I start making changes to those jobs, I send signals to the buyers, and all of a sudden we're creating more variables to address. I have some examples, but I can't get into them right now. But essentially, by firming up that fence, we can reduce the amount of variables within that time span. I've locked my schedule, so to speak. Therefore, I've locked the material requirements within that time frame. Anything that happens outside of that, we'll deal with it. But in the next week or two, once the system is within the time fence, let's leave those details alone. Your reschedule in and out, as you make changes, a customer calls in and says, listen, I need you to expedite my order, or I need to postpone my order, or the vendor calls in and says, I don't have the material, or I can't get it to you on this date. Or as a production manager, I start making changes to some jobs that I've already scheduled. The system will ignore those changes. And we're going to see the result here where we say postpone or expedite suggestions. We're going to see how that comes to fruition in just a little bit here. But basically, it will, again, ignore those changes within that delta, so that as a buyer or a production manager, I'm not having to revisit these things. I don't have to deal with variables that are affecting me tomorrow. I can firm up and lock those things into place. If I'm out of balance for some reason, it'll suggest a new PO or a new job. It will not suggest I change the existing. Another screen you'll find in your part site details. This one as well focuses on your make items. Multiples. So when you produce, when it sees an imbalance for a make item and it makes a suggestion to produce this, you can tell the system in what multiple. So for example, if I can get 4 finished parts out of one piece of material and I want to reduce the amount of remnants I need to manage, maybe I do my multiple in 4. So that when the system sees an imbalance, and let's say it says you need 5, it'll set up a job for 8 so that I optimize my material usage. Another aspect would be for cycle times. Let's say I want to schedule my resources, and in daily increments, let's say, and I can cut 50 of these parts per day. And I want to keep the scheduling noise to a minimum. Maybe I set a multiple of 50 so that when it does see the requirement and it does set up a job and I schedule the job, I occupy that resource for a known period of time. A good example of that is I worked with a planner scheduler one time, and he described his scheduling like a brick wall. If all my bricks are roughly the same size, it's much easier to build that wall. But if all my bricks are different sizes, it takes a lot more work to fit it all together. And this is one way to help, it's not standardize, but normalize the size of your job, if you will. Then you have your minimum and your maximum. Minimum amount that you'll produce at any given time, maximum amount that you'll produce at any time. And then you also have a days of supply. Now, this applies to both make and buy items. And, it aggregates your demand across the number of days here so that you're not generating multiple POs for the same material throughout the week. If you see that I need some of this material and I go as far as to generate a PO, let's generate a PO large enough to satisfy the demand plus a little bit more to make sure that I'm not having to create, many records all the time. And it does the same thing with your jobs. Just another tool to, again, reduce the number of suggestions that you're being presented with each day.